Good afternoon. Welcome everybody to another edition of Boomer Breakdown. This time a Monday edition. Thanks everybody for coming in and joining. Um, and that you will come in and join right now. No one's online as of yet, but please come find us just to come talk a little bit of a late edition of our Boomer Breakdown for this week. Me personally, I was otherwise unavailable on Saturday to do this, so I wanted to do kind of a 2 day after look at the post game show. So I like I said, I apologize. I think some of you know, some of you that watch, I coach high school basketball. We were in a tournament out of state this weekend, so I wasn't able to be around to do the post game show. So um, thanks everybody that, like I said, thanks everybody that will join. So for those of you that follow me, make sure that you follow me at Jason Ray One, and I will talk about everything Oklahoma related, and stuff like that. And you can have any of the latest news and notes in terms of when we're going to go live and stuff like that. If you're not also subscribed to the channel, that will do that same thing as well. So, anyways, apologize to everybody that is normally used to me coming on Saturdays. So, and if you have followed me today, you will know that I preface this by saying if you're looking for a sunshine pumping, a optimist only, don't say anything bad or negative about your team type of situation, this probably isn't the one for you. Okay, so I'm gonna be brutally honest based on what I saw. Brutally honest on just some continuing troubling trends for this team, for this program, and then really just go from there. Just to kind of get your thoughts and the outlook on the season, the outlook on the program, um, and all that being said, so let's go first to just kind of talking about just a little bit of the breakdown of the game. So I think, like you guys, that like everybody that watched it, was very um, disappointed watching. Not incredibly surprised, to be honest with you. I mean, I think a lot of people, a lot of fans, a lot of people just watching Oklahoma thought that they were just going to be able to turn it on. I mean, it's one thing that I've come in here and say that this team has a problem, and they're playing with fire. They have been playing with fire pretty much all season, and they've just not played anyone with enough talent that's good enough to expose them for what they are this year. Um, and I think at this point they finally found a team in Baylor that's good, really good football team that was able to do exactly that, was able to capitalize on a lot of things. So a lot of the same things that we've been seeing for a big majority of the year, unable to run the football again. Another week, less negative, not negative, but less than 100 yards rushing. Oklahoma had a couple of games earlier this year where they were, up over 200 yards, but over the last couple of weeks, a couple of games, it's been back to really just very average running the ball, very average running our offensive line play. I think the one thing that you saw, and it was a little bit to be predicted, and don't, I'm not going to hammer on Caleb Williams at all. A true freshman going into that environment was going to be tough. Granted, we've talked about that in terms of his kind of his maturation level, where he's at. He's a kid that is a true freshman. He's still, we have to remember, as good as he's played, he still is a true freshman, and he's not, and he made a lot of true freshman mistakes. A couple of really just bad plays on the interceptions, wasn't entirely accurate, and things like that. And that'll come. I mean, that'll happen from a true freshman perspective. So you don't put much of the blame on him. Having said that, this Oklahoma team needed to be put into a position where they weren't asking him to win the football game, and that's exactly what happened. They asked him to win. They asked him to win the football game on the outside of Jaden Hazelwood and probably Mike Woods. The receivers got bullied the entire game. Um, and then, like I said, wasn't able to run the football and really kind of got a garbage touchdown late that really was pretty meaningless in the game. Outside of that, after that initial 7-0 lead, Baylor pretty much dominated the game. I know the 27-14 score isn't very indicative of a blowout, but it was pretty much well handled and dominated for the most part by Baylor. So really bad offensively. I think the lion's share of the blame of this loss is on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, I think it was a little bit of a mixed bag. To be honest, a mixed bag of good play, pretty good defensive play, okay play, and just some bad play. I think in terms of the health, you got some guys back that wasn't really hadn't been playing a whole lot as of late. You've got DJ Graham, you've got Woody Washington back. I think Key Lawrence was exposed a little bit, just in terms of nothing terribly bad, but just in terms of his lack of experience at the position. But I think the one thing that continues to be a problem for this team is missed tackles, which we saw a bunch of that, and getting pressure on the quarterback. Still wasn't able to do that, as well as they need to do. So in the end, you give up almost 300 yards rushing to a team that's pretty good. And I think, and we'll get into that in terms of just kind of talking about the outlook, for this year's team in the program just overall. So, and then very uncharacteristic. I don't think it really uh, ended up meaning too much in terms of the game. I think it would have ended about the same, but Gabe Burkett even missed a couple of field goals in this game. Michael Turk was still excellent from a punting perspective, but yeah, overall, I think it was not incredibly surprising for me. Watching, I kind of to a certain extent, kind of saw this coming. I think this Oklahoma team has not really been good all year, to be honest with you guys, um, and it kind of showed. This, and it's not like one of these. It's not like a game that Oklahoma's not played well in a couple of games. They've not really been a great football team all year. To be honest, when it started with Tulane, a team that's only won one football game all year, that Oklahoma struggled with. Quite frankly, you could make a case that they were fortunate to win. Um, Nebraska, kind of the same way. And then it kind of goes on and on and on. Fortunate to win a lot of these games that they were much better talent wise. Now that they're the talent level is either more even or not really at the same level that it has been. Then this is what you get. You got the same production against a much more talented team on the road. And then you got what you have. And then so Oklahoma has two games. I thought, honestly, I don't think this is going to make anyone feel better. I thought coming into this game, this Baylor team was probably was the most winnable of the three. I certainly didn't think that Oklahoma couldn't win all three, but of the three, if you're going to go in terms of which games were most winnable, I kind of gave this number one, Iowa State this week number two, and then Oklahoma State number three. So it doesn't get any easier by all intents and purposes. It gets harder. I know that Iowa State, is a little bit down based on where we thought that they would be this year, coming into the season. So it's a situation where Oklahoma has to get much better in just 1 week. I think one thing that was very very bizarre is that the game plan was a little bit weird for me. So that's my thoughts on the game. I have more thoughts really just kind of in what's going on with this team, what's the outlook of the program. So just kind of getting into that, I think I'm judging this based on Oklahoma being a team that should be a perennial playoff national championship conversation program. no, they're not going to make the playoffs every year. No, they're not going to challenge for a national championship every year, but they need to be in a conversation every year. And I think this year more than any, a lot of people, including myself, that thought that Oklahoma had a really strong opportunity to make it to a not only to make it to a playoff, but to make it to a national championship game based on what Oklahoma had back on defense, what they were returning offensively as well at the skill position perspective. So I think when I preface a lot of these comments, it will be it will strongly be based upon that. So just some notes that I have kind of taken and listening to a couple of people that know X's and O's a little bit better than I do is, if you guys go listen to Teddy and Gabe Iker's podcast, they do just a tremendous job getting in the weeds and breaking this down, and people that obviously that I trust that are closer, to the program than I am. But I think this is one thing that Gabe Iker has talked about. They're a little bit too complicated on the offensive side of the ball. Whether it's they just this is Lincoln Riley's system. Just the run schemes that they have in the blocking, a lot of gap scheme. They don't do a whole lot of zone, a whole lot of stretch plays that pretty much every team in the country does. Oklahoma's offense is very particular, very sophisticated, and I think it's showing itself now that they don't maybe have the same talent that they've had in the past. Recruiting on the offensive line hasn't been as good as it's been in the past. So I think when you look at those things, guys, it's a situation where Oklahoma has not been anywhere near as talented, and they've not been as effective the last couple of years running the football. This year has been one of the worst, that they've had since Lincoln Riley and being able to run the football. Last year was down for a good part of the year. They picked it up a little bit middle to end, but then even the year before, I mean, Jalen Hurts helped it, but it wasn't. But it wasn't a great running team. So that's the bread and butter. That's what sets up this offense. And it's, whether it's, Gabe used the comment being too cool. But so I think that's part of it as well. There's a lot of scheme issues that you can look at, whether it be the offensive line or whether it be kind of the play calling, whether it be what Oklahoma's trying to do. Like for example, Oklahoma kept trying to throw the ball deep. Um, the intermediate passing game, really was non-existent. There was just a lot of deep throws, and for whatever reason, Lincoln Riley just kept going to that. And I think I read something. I think four of over half of Oklahoma's losses under Lincoln Riley have been after a bye week, which is really bizarre, because most teams play much better after a bye week. Obviously, you have 2 weeks to prepare for the other team. You have game plans to put into place for that long of a time. You've got not only you've got prep, but you've got things that you can look at in terms of resting your players and stuff like that, and getting everybody healthy. So very bizarre that Oklahoma has been at that spot where they've just not been as successful down the stretch on bye weeks as they could have been, as they should have been. So I think that's part of it. I think the philosophy that Oklahoma has had on the defensive side of the ball, the speed D, having smaller, quicker, faster guys on the defensive line, just all across the board, it looks like it's not necessarily working. It was one of those things where I was very hesitant to admit this, but I think Oklahoma's not as strong and tough as they really need to be. On the defensive line, all across the board. If I'm being honest, their offensive lines same way. They're not as strong as they need to be. So I think, and you're not going to hear me come on here and very often and talk about firing coaches, firing staff members, things like that. That's not really for me to decide. I'm not I'm not a guy that just blames coaching, just in general. However, well, I'm not a guy that blames coaching in terms of really like this person needs to be fired, this person needs to go, things like that. But it seems pretty clear there's some kind of a shakeup that needs to happen. The strength and conditioning program isn't anywhere near what it needs to be or where it was under Schmidt for years and years in the Bob Stoops regime. They're not as strong as they need to be. Powerful. Anton Harrison's a guy on the offensive line who's pretty weak. Andrew Rames kind of the same way. They don't have a lot of bulls in there on the defensive side of the ball. Really, the same thing. Perion Winfrey, for a guy of his size and his stature, he's not very strong, not anywhere near as strong as he needs to be. So, I mean, I think that's a glaring issue. Defensively, tackling has been a glaring issue for this team all season long. They've not really been able to come back for that. They've come back from that. They've not been able to. They've not really been able to be consistent and take that next step from a defensive side of the ball that I think all of us watching and anticipated them doing this year. It's been a clear regression. So I think all of those things when you think about that, maybe I don't necessarily. I'm not the person that's going to say that they need to fire some coaches or they need to make some coaching changes here, but I think they need to take a hard, long look at the philosophy on the running game, on the offensive side of the ball, and the whole philosophy around quicker, faster defensive players, particularly defensive linemen, that allows Oklahoma just to get pushed around. And I know that Oklahoma has a talent, but looking on the field, watching that game against Baylor, it was hard to tell who the more talented team was. Just not coaching, not anything around that, just off the bus, who has the most dudes, who has the most guys that you're like, wow, that's a football player right there. And Oklahoma doesn't really have as many of those. Yes, they got talent, but I think that traditionally over the last few years, we've been saying the gap between Oklahoma and the Big 12 and the rest of the Big 12 is pretty sizable. I think it's narrowed over the last couple of years as well, but I think at the same time, it's really, I mean, in some of these games, it's close. Like it's close to see, and I think Oklahoma's been at an advantage and but of just being able to be the better athletes and get away with some things. So that's concerning as well. And so when you take all of this into consideration, um, you know the killer instinct has not been there. There's a culture problem, and I think culturally it's just kind of a we throw our helmet down and we're Oklahoma and we feel like that we should win championships. We should be better than you, and they're just not. I mean, they're just not at that level right now. They're not. They don't have the ability to do that right now, just because of the talent level, and it's only going to get worse when Oklahoma goes to the SEC. They thought that the talent gap is similar there, but it is bad, from a talent perspective, going to the Big 12 to the SEC. The SEC, obviously, we guys know, much, much more talent in that conference than any other conference in America. So, Oklahoma's got to get there. So, just from the outlook of this season, I know we talked a lot about playoffs here. From an Oklahoma perspective, I don't think there's any need to talk about playoffs anymore. Yes, conceivably, if Oklahoma were to beat Iowa State, were to beat Oklahoma State, and then likely Oklahoma State again, in the Big 12 championship game. Theoretically, they could put themselves in a position to be able to play in the playoffs, or make an argument for themselves to make the playoffs. But just me speaking honestly about this team this year, where I see this team after last week, I don't think that this team. I think this team has a much higher probability of losing the next two games than they do winning a Big 12 championship. Just my opinion. They could come out and play extremely well against Iowa State and Oklahoma State, and I could be wrong. But I think the way they look right now, I would give them much more of an opportunity to lose those two games and not even make the Big 12 championship game. versus being in a situation where they're fighting for a playoff spot. When you look at some of these top teams, they're not. I mean, they're not top 10. I don't. I mean, right now the way that Oklahoma's playing, I don't know that Oklahoma's a top 20 team right now. Just the way they are. They've got too many holes. They've got a true freshman quarterback. They've got a bad run scheme on the offensive side of the ball. Offensive line isn't as good as it's been in the past. Receiving talent is fine. I think it's good enough to win you a championship. Defensive line, they're not getting enough pressure on the quarterback. They're not able to they're not able to tackle as well as they need to in the open field. They're not able to cover on the back end. I don't think they've coached as well across the board as they have in the past. So I don't know what it is. A lot of rumors about Lincoln Riley potentially or LSU having an interest in Lincoln Riley and maybe it being kind of reciprocated. I don't know any of that. I do know that he was not on his coach's show, and then wasn't at the weekly press conference this last week. And I know a lot of people were wondering, is there a whatever it is? Maybe it was a distraction. I know Lincoln Riley came out and said it's not anywhere near as interesting as anyone would would want it to made it out to be. So I don't know about that, but if that played into any just lack of focus this week. But I think it'll be interesting to see how Oklahoma bounces back. They had the longest winning streak in the country at 17 or 18 games. I can't remember exactly. That was snapped. They hadn't lost in November in a long time. That was snapped. So got to find a way to come back and beat a really good Iowa State team, which also was coming off of a loss. So obviously they'll be incredibly motivated to beat Oklahoma, team that's played Oklahoma really well, really close over the last few years, and don't really expect that to change at all. So I know there's not a lot of you that's been able to join. I know this is kind of a hard time here at 3:30 in the afternoon. But that's fine. So I just wanted to come on here and just to have a quick video for you guys, a quick pod, just so you guys could just to catch up with everyone. So like I said, I think the next few games are going to be very big for the program. I mean, you hate to say that just in terms of what what could happen with this team, going forward throughout the year, but the trajectory of next year as well. To see what that looks like. I think one of the things that we've seen over the last, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years is any year that Oklahoma has had a lot of I don't know the word, a lot of notoriety, a lot of um, they always have a high ceiling, so to speak. But I think anytime that Oklahoma is really either predicted to win a national championship, be number one, and things like that. I think Oklahoma has underachieved, whereas when they've kind of been the underdog, they've been a little bit better than advertised. So I think it's interesting. Oklahoma, against an Iowa State team this week that has lost 4 games. Oklahoma's at home only a 4-point favorite. I mean, it's not anything that I'm surprised at, but it's very bizarre just to see and mark it down. I don't know that no one wants to hear this, but especially if Oklahoma State beats Texas Tech Saturday, Oklahoma will be an underdog in Bedlam. I don't really remember how long it's been since that's happened, but Oklahoma State will absolutely be favored in this game. And I think those of us that watch Oklahoma State, I think Oklahoma State is the team that Oklahoma wanted to be this year. They're dynamic on the defensive side of the ball. They run the ball well. They seem to be very well coached, specifically on the defensive side. They have a quarterback that's kind of up and down, makes some mistakes, and is very inconsistent at times, but he has played winning football. Here, the last few games for them. So, yeah, Oklahoma State's the team that Oklahoma really, quite honestly, wished they were this year. And this is, this is no disrespect or no slight to Oklahoma, but it's true. They're running the ball well. They're tackling in space. They have a dynamic defense, best in the league. Maybe not by far, but they're absolutely the best defense in the Big 12 this year. And Oklahoma State is a team that has put themselves in position to not only win a Big 12 championship, but how they've also put themselves in a position to potentially make the playoffs. I would guess that they're probably in the neighborhood of where Oklahoma was this past week, 7 or 8, in the latest rankings, and they were incredibly impressive. I think 63-17 was uh, was the was the score against TCU. So they've put themselves in position, just being pretty impressive. 20, I think 24-3 over West Virginia the week before. So yeah, they've been very impressive. So I'll go through some of your comments here. Any questions? Yeah, offense was definitely unavailable on Saturday. So yeah, they did not play at the level that they needed to play. 7 points for a large majority of the game is not going to get it done in any conference, but definitely not going to get it done. Um, I think they did give up on the running game, and I think just that I don't know Lincoln Riley's inability. I don't know if it's just lack of confidence in the run game, but his Lincoln's inability to want to dedicate himself to the run game is kind of baffling this year. But yeah, no, they it was given up on, and it was just, I mean, it was hard. It was hard to watch. Definitely agreed. I think that's something that seriously needs to be considered in the off season. There's a few things, but that one's one that's kind of at the top of my list that really needs to be considered. I think to your point, because they've lost out on some recruiting, offensive line recruiting hasn't been as good, in the past couple of years as it was previously, and I think Oklahoma, and we're seeing that from a talent perspective. They're not as talented on the offensive line, and I think part of it's the scheme, just the complication. And one of the things that they were talking, Teddy and Gabe were talking about, is even at the next level, NFL teams don't run a scheme that's as complicated as this. So I think that's part of it, at least not as much as Oklahoma does. So I think that's part of it as well. EJ, thanks for the comment. OU doesn't have packages for adjustment. Be honest, I'm glad we took that loss. It was coming eventually. I don't think the last thing I want to see was getting blown up. Yeah, and I think that's fair, EJ. I think a lot of people don't want to see another playoff loss at all, specifically another blowout playoff loss. And I think that's probably where Oklahoma. I mean, depending on where they got, I think matching up with Cincinnati, that could have been a decent matchup for them based on just based on the talent level. But if Oklahoma would have been matched up against Georgia, would have been matched up against an Alabama, would have been matched up against an Ohio State, I think it would have probably wouldn't have been a pretty matchup for Oklahoma. So I think that's a fair comment and representation, EJ. Absolutely. Um, yeah, I think Kennedy Brooks had around 18, 19 carries, if I remember right. Just kind of looking. Let me pull up the box score here. Um, so actually, I'm sorry, 14 carries. 14 carries for 55 yards um, for for Kennedy Brooks. So definitely not as many carries as he needs to have, without a doubt. And giving up on the quarterback run game wasn't as big of an impact in the game as Oklahoma probably needed it to be. Sheldon Riley needs to hire an offensive coordinator. This is something that I've said over the last couple of years that I think would be beneficial. It's just so hard, and this isn't a knock on Riley at all. Definitely not a knock on him, but just it's hard to be a head coach and do all of the things that you have to be able to do, facilitate a program, be the overall game manager from the sidelines as a head coach, and also be worried about being an offensive coordinator. I think it's, there's Steve Spurrier is I think he's the only one that I can remember that has been an offensive coordinator and has also won, also had a head coach and also won a national championship. So I think it's um, I think it's something that needs to happen. I don't think that it will. And the only thing that I can think of is maybe if he hired his brother Garrett to be the offensive coordinator. I just don't think that Riley's one of those guys that would trust anyone to run the offense as well as he does. So maybe that's arrogance. I mean, you could very well say that that's the case, but even so, I would be a little bit. I would. It would be great if it happened, but I would be a little bit surprised if it happened. Megan's still going to win the league. I mean, I hope so. I hope you're right. I don't like. I wouldn't predict it at this point. It's going to be as even if even if Oklahoma beats Iowa State. Oklahoma State's going to be a tough win in Stillwater this year. This is the best. This is the best Oklahoma State team that they've had in quite some time. So would be a little bit surprised at this point if Oklahoma was able to beat Oklahoma State in Stillwater. Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, comment if there's a lingering quarterback controversy. I don't think there is. I think Caleb Williams has played extremely well up until this point. Like I said, he is a true freshman playing on the road in a tough environment against a tough team. I didn't maybe think he would struggle at the level that he did, but not completely unheard of for a true freshman to struggle on the road in his first, just big, huge road environment. Keep in mind, guys, he played in Texas, neutral field, at Kansas, obviously not a super tough environment. At home against TCU, at home against Texas Tech. This is his first taste of a real big time opponent on the road. And so expecting him to carry the team or be a strong just to carry the team overall can't is not something that should expect. Oklahoma needs to hire a coach with fire and passion. Let Riley be the offensive coordinator. I mean, I think that's good in theory, but that's obviously something that's never going to happen. But, I think the one thing that I would say about Riley is the fire. He comes off as soft. I think his comments after the game come off as really soft. I think he was, you know, not putting a whole lot of blame on his team, talking about how upset he was about Dave Aranda kicking the field goal late, how upset he was with the officials not throwing a penalty at the end of the game when the fans rushed the field, talking about safety. Like that's all well and good. That's that's not the best flex, I think, coming off of a game where you played really bad and you got exposed. So I think that was, to me, if I'm a player, it's weird. I mean, I think it's weird for my head coach that's the angle. I'm even, I think if I'm a player, I'm even okay with him, you know, throwing us under the bus to the media, saying, how bad they played, how bad everything was. We've got to get better, things like that. I think I would have a little bit more respect than kind of complaining and about stuff like that. That's not really that much part of the game. So, well, I'm gonna thanks everybody for joining this afternoon. Like I said, Saturday we will have a normal pod immediately following the Oklahoma Iowa State game around 2:33 ish. Catch me on Wednesday with Mark really breaking this game down a little bit further, and then also talking about we'll talk about a lot of things. We talk about the playoffs. We'll talk about the maybe even the Heisman, just from a national perspective, but obviously breaking down Oklahoma, Iowa State, and then looking at Oklahoma's trajectory for the rest of the year. So I thank you guys all for joining, and we will see you in a couple of days. Boomer Sooner.